So this week's assignment talks about what happens to our waste, particularly our electronic waste. There are a lot of conflicting findings in Junkyard Planet where there are some benefits, but then there are also some really negative impacts. So this problem is really obvious and also very huge. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Minter and his phone. Where he's very transparent about it, but he wants to help the planet, but he does not want to have to reuse his old device. So he goes to the Shanghai marketplace to sell his 4 old phones, and for reuse, not by him, by someone else. And he finds out that because his devices are older than 5 years old and they don't have access to the internet, they're not reusable, even by places that are really poor, and even though they still work just fine. So this is where the conflict arises. And the value of this is that Minter, his wants are more important than his needs. And this is a societal problem where people want the newest thing. It doesn't matter if their old thing still works. So, and this is spread to even some of the poorest places in the world, like Africa. So my second point is in U.S. Electronic recycling, what's considered environmentally sound is just shredding devices whole, even when there's a metal on there that's really rare and also profitable. It's still better to just shred it, and it's easier. So the conflict is that there are many of these resources in the devices that are lost to incineration or to the landfills, even though they're recycled. So the conflict is it supports groups in combatant zones like in the Congo, and also destroys the environment because they're mining in those areas for these precious metals that we only have so many of, and that we could otherwise just reuse and recycle. So other countries do this by hand. They hand strip them, and it prevents this part of this problem. The value is not our collective rights. We're not valuing our collective rights. We're not valuing a healthy environment, but we're valuing profit. This is a profit-driven thing. It's less profitable to ship it over to someone who's going to strip it by hand. It's better to just shred it. So on the flip side, if we go to other places where they do hand strip it, what does this look like though? It's bad, okay? Because this is on page 185 and 186 of Junkyard Planet. The unprotected workers, it's hazardous fumes from burning the metals off, and they use corrosive acids to get the rest of this off. And this also has a bad environmental impact because once they're done with the acid, they go and they dump it in a river, or they dump it in some open waterway. And because of this, it's so bad in Yuyu, China, that the water is so contaminated they have to truck in drinking water every single day to even be able to survive. So the conflict, workers are escaping poverty, and that's great for them. But it's really unhealthy for them. It causes all sorts of kidney problems and bone loss, and it's also really bad for the environment because they're putting these chemicals in the environment. The values here, they were valuing prosperity over the collective access to a healthy environment, but they don't seem to care. So this is on page 208 of Junkyard Planet. I'm going to quote Minter. "I look around the room at everyone laughing, catching up as a family. They don't seem to care about the toxic work done downstairs in the courtyard. Maybe they shouldn't. After all, could they live like this as a family if they were still farmers?" And then on page 211, I asked to try to formulate a polite and respectful means of asking these questions, he asked if I'd mind snapping a photo of him and Henry with the 2 villages, the abandoned old one and the new high-rise one in the background. I agree, and as his chef puffs out to pose, I decide that I have my answers. They are perfectly happy doing this, and he predicts that in the future, that once they have these, once they are in a profited enough place, they will start to value these collective rights of their environment. So another conflict in chapter 15, Minter details why this problem exists, because consumers want the newest and the best thing, even if their old one works, just like Minter's phone example on page 207. So companies like Apple encourage this, and they help people feel better about it because they present themselves as a very green company, which we know from the reading this week that they aren't actually doing these things. But it helps people to consume unnecessarily when they feel better about it. So this is from page 251 to 252 in Junkyard. Minter talks about these 2 experiments, one where people are cutting paper by a recycling bin, and one where people are cutting paper without a recycling bin, and people cut up twice as much paper when they had access to recycling than when they didn't have access to recycling, even when they didn't know where that recycling was going to end up going. So along the same lines, people feel guilt-free. They feel like they're doing something good. So recycling has a cost too. So this is page 253 of Junkyard Planet, and in the 1960s, people recycled 5.6 million tons. And in 2010, people recycled 65 million tons. That's great. People are recycling more. However, this comes with a downside, because in 1960s, people recycled 81.1 million tons of trash, but in 2010 alone, they recycled trashed nearly 250 million tons of trash. So, I mean, with feeling better about recycling, we're consuming more, which then a lot of that goes then to the landfill. So that's bad. The values here, again, are consumption and also convenience, because having the latest gadget is not something that we need, but it's something that we want. It's a convenience. So the values that I find most important are protecting the environment, because if we don't protect the environment, we aren't going to have a place to live after a certain amount of time. It seems like we're rapidly going towards that. Also, responsibly helping developing countries. So Apple is the exact opposite of this. They're all profit-driven, and it doesn't matter to them. They don't provide enough money to their retailers to actually be able to support their employees. And then the last one is reducing consumption. And so then what does this justice demand of us as consumers? First of all, it demands that we demand of our manufacturers longer lives of our products. And be able to repair, reuse, and recycle them. So I have a great example for this. My 2.5-year-old MacBook died 2 weeks ago. And when I went in to repair it, they suggested to me that I buy a brand new one, even though it was only 2.5 years old. And I refused and went to go get it repaired. And after digging in more, I found out that they consider their products vintage after 5 years old. And they will no longer repair or produce parts so you can repair those products. So we also need to demand that we can buy products in a green way from our manufacturers. Another thing is reducing. So another great example is our book, Junkyard Planet. I reduced because I didn't buy a copy of this. I borrowed it from the library, and someone used it before me, someone used it after me. Another example, phones. So this is my old phone. It's about 5 years old, and I'm not using this anymore because it didn't give me service where I needed to, but my mom is using it now. So it is something that we reused. Oh, and it still works. So we can also do things like clothing. We can donate clothing, and we can reduce and reuse in a lot of ways, and even small things can make a difference overall if we all do them. So thank you.